Today, we're going to talk about a man who was as much a philosopher as he was a physician. This is a guy whose ideas were so powerful, they were required reading in universities from Baghdad all the way to Bologna for over 600 years. This is the story of Avicenna, the Persian polymath who basically bridged two different worlds.
And look, when a top historian of science like George Sarton calls you one of the greatest thinkers in history, you know it's not an exaggeration. Avicenna wasn't just a doctor or just a philosopher, he was a true polymath. He mastered logic, metaphysics, medicine, you name it. The intellectual footprint he left behind is just massive.
So that brings us to the big question for this whole explainer. How? How did one man's work written 1,000 years ago in Persia end up completely dominating the intellectual world of two continents for more than 6 centuries? Let's dive in.
Now, to really get a handle on Avicenna, you first have to understand the world he was born into. And trust me, it was a truly extraordinary time and place.
He was born right in the middle of the Islamic Golden Age, a period of absolutely incredible intellectual energy. And we're not just talking about preserving old knowledge from Greece and Persia. No, this was about challenging it, building on it, creating something brand new. His hometown, Bukhara, was this total hotbed of ideas, a place where philosophy and science were literally in the air you breathed. It was the perfect fertile ground for a genius like him to grow.
But don't go picturing a quiet life spent in a library. His story was more like a whirlwind of pure brilliance, political drama, and constant movement.
Avicenna's genius was just off the charts from day one. Can you imagine becoming a practicing physician at 17 with the Sultan as your patient? But his life was anything but stable. He was always on the move, caught up in all this political turmoil, serving one ruler, then fleeing from another, even getting thrown in prison. And here's the part that just blows my mind. He wrote some of his most important works, the very books that shaped centuries of thought, while on the road, often just from memory.
And speaking of those profound works, there's one philosophical idea that stands out as his most revolutionary. It's a distinction that would echo through the halls of philosophy for 1,000 years.
His whole philosophical revolution kicks off with a question that sounds almost deceptively simple. Okay, so think about it. What is the real, fundamental difference between the idea of a horse in your mind and an actual, living, breathing horse standing out there in a field?
And Avicenna's brilliant answer was to split them in two. He said everything has an essence. That's its blueprint, its whatness. So for a horse, the essence is its horseness. 4 legs, a mane, the whole deal. But, and this is the absolute key, that essence by itself doesn't guarantee that a horse actually exists. For that to happen, something else has to be added to it, existence. He saw existence as this extra attribute that has to come from an outside cause. The idea of a horse and a real horse are two totally separate things.
Okay, so this leads directly to a super important concept. He called things like us and horses and planets contingent beings. What does that mean? It means their essence doesn't guarantee their existence. They could exist, or they could not exist. For them to actually be here, something else had to cause them to exist.
And using that one distinction, Avicenna built one of history's most powerful arguments for the existence of God, called the proof of the truthful. The logic is just so elegant. Okay, step 1. The world is full of these contingent things that all need a cause. Step 2. You can't have a chain of causes that goes back forever and ever. That's just logically impossible. So, step 3. That chain has to end somewhere, which means, step 4, it must end with a being that is not contingent, a necessary being, whose very essence is its existence, a being that is the uncaused first cause of everything else.
But Avicenna wasn't just a philosopher with his head in the clouds. He took that same systematic, razor-sharp logic and applied it to the very real, very practical world of medicine.
And the result was his masterpiece, the Canon of Medicine. Now, this wasn't just another medical book. This thing was so comprehensive, so authoritative, that it became the standard medical textbook in European universities for over 600 years. Stop and think about that. That's a longer lifespan than the time separating us from Christopher Columbus.
So what was its secret? Why did it last so long? It was Avicenna's systematic genius. He took all the medical knowledge that existed at the time, from the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, and organized it all into one logical, easy-to-use encyclopedia. And some of his ideas were just astonishingly ahead of their time.
He suggested that diseases were spread by tiny, invisible organisms and was one of the first people to recommend quarantine to stop them from spreading. I mean, these were revolutionary ideas, and they earned him the title he's still known by, the Prince of Physicians.
So when you put it all together, his impact wasn't just big, it was global. He literally bridged the intellectual worlds of the East and the West.
This dual legacy is what makes Avicenna so fascinating. In the Islamic world, his philosophy was so huge that it sparked debates that lasted for centuries. But at the same time, as soon as his works were translated into Latin, they just lit a fire in Europe. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas were deeply influenced by his ideas on essence and existence, which went on to shape Christian philosophy for generations. And in medicine, the influence was even more direct. In both the East and the West, the canon was simply the ultimate authority, putting him right up there with Hippocrates and Galen.
And that leaves us with one final, kind of haunting thought. We know Avicenna wrote about 450 different works. Today, we only have around 240 of them. He completely changed the course of medicine and philosophy with just the books that survived. So you have to wonder, what incredible ideas, what other paradigm-shifting thoughts were in the 210 works that were lost to history? What other worlds could he have opened up for us?